you. I want to take a moment to offer a land acknowledgement before we proceed with this evening's program. Every community owes its existence and strength to the generations before them around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to migrate from their homes in the hope of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere. We are on indigenous land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. We pay our respects to Piscataway elders and ancestors, and please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here today. So, gotta turn my page. Believe it or not, tonight's lecture is the first event of the academic year, as the Driscoll Center has been closed for renovations, and it's really a joy to see people back into this space and to welcome you here. On your way into tonight's event, you may have noticed and encountered many new things. We have new signage, new gallery walls, new fonts, new staff, and a new director. But the Driscoll Center, now at nearly 25 years old, is certainly evolving, but our overall mission remains the same. Our institution, and I do mean our, because the Driscoll Center belongs to all of you, seeks to honor the legacy of David C. Driscoll. David devoted his life to mentoring Black scholars and artists and to creating spaces for their work to be seen. We continue this legacy by using our collections, programming, and annual fellowships to cultivate and advance researchers, scholars, and artists. As a creative incubator here at the University of Maryland, we provide the university and global communities with access to one of the most foremost collections of Black archival art, 2,000 art objects, and 50,000 archival objects deep. Our programming, such as tonight's lecture, encourages active learning and engagement with these assets, which advances individuals in their unique journeys, as well as visibility and opportunity for past, present, and future Black artists. Before I offer my introduction to tonight's speaker, I want to take a moment to thank the staff of the Driscoll Center who helped make this event possible. So thank you to our graduate assistants, Clea Massiani, who's here, as well as Juhi Kim and Dominic Pearson, all students in the graduate program in art history and archaeology here. And also to our archivist, David Conway and Karina Nelson, and to our business manager, Kristen Vare. I also have to mention that Dr. Aranke's lecture and reception that will follow is made possible by the generous support of our patrons and donors, including Jean and Dr. Robert Steele, who established the Visual Arts of the African Diaspora Lecture Fund in honor of David Driscoll in 2012. Tonight's lecture, Death's Futurity, The Visual Life of Black Power, is presented by Dr. Sampada Aranke. Dr. Aranke is a friend and also an associate professor of art history and comparative studies at The Ohio State University, and has previously held teaching appointments at the San Francisco Art Institute and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her research interests include performance, theories of embodiment, visual culture, and Black cultural and aesthetic theory. Aranke has published essays, articles, and criticism in a variety of academic and general publications, including Artforum, Art Journal, ASAP, and October. She's also written catalog essays for exhibitions by artists like Sadie Barnette, Betye Saar, Rashid Johnson, Faith Ringgold, and many others. And in 2021, her fantastic article, Blackouts and Other Visual Escapes, received the prestigious Art Journal Award from the College Art Association. For her lecture tonight, Dr. Aranke will speak about her newest book, and I mean new, published in February, published by Duke University Press, entitled Des Futurity. After her lecture, Dr. Aranke will entertain a few questions from the audience, but for now, please help me to welcome Dr. Sampada Aranke.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I want to thank Jordana. I'm getting a little feedback, just a tiny bit. How's that? Better? Okay. Maybe that? Okay. You know, these are things that happen. We're breaking in a new building. Okay, I want to thank the brilliance that is Jordana. You are such an incredible force in the field and embody a generosity and kindness that I'm in awe of, but you make it look so easy, and I know that it's not easy. It takes a lot of work, so I'm really grateful for you. David and Karina, I've been able to be here all week doing research in the archives, and archivists are heroes for us historians, so I'm really grateful for you all. Clea, for your patience and logistical magic. And you know, these roads are so small. I'm sure we all find this kind of synchronicity, right? Like, Clea was a student at the San Francisco Art Institute where so many great things happened, so we're having a reunion. So it's so great to be together again. I also want to thank David Driscoll and the Driscoll family. I'm so humbled to be here in this space with you all today. Driscoll's love and commitment to Black artists and art was giant, and I'm so grateful that I get to live in a world where we get to unpack and embrace the work he did for years to come. And finally, I'd like to thank Bobby Hutton, Fred Hampton, and George Jackson, and all those who lived and died for the Black liberation movement. I wouldn't be here without you and all your labor and love, and both of that, your labor and love, are testaments to a vision we need in this moment. In Death's Futurity, The Visual Life of Black Power, I analyze how death was rhetorically and visually imagined and mobilized as a politically generative tool in the face of state-sanctioned violence during the Black Power era. Mobilizing archival findings that have never been published, this book argues for an attuned attention to the ephemera that circulated in the wake of 3 spectacular murders of Black Panther Party members between 1968 and 1971. Each chapter pairs one object made in response to one murder in order to offer up a series of provocations in terms of the centrality of death in 1960s Black radical politics. Upon research at multiple archives and libraries, I came across a variety of original print culture and documentary media, some of which you see in front of you, ranging from political posters, original journalistic publications, community organizing meeting notes, and documentary photography that catalyzed how profoundly state murders of Black radicals informed the political agenda of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. By incorporating these archival objects into the project, I have chosen to recompose histories and theories of Blackness that were produced out of what I see as a revolutionary Black visual culture. Though seemingly fixed, these archival documents continue to shift, emerge, and appear institutionally and otherwise, like the image you see in front of you, a list of books in George Jackson's prison cell library in San Quentin, a document only recently released by the California Department of Corrections. The objects I have chosen in the book are ones whose primary purpose was for political use, whether political posters intended to be wheat-pasted in public places or weekly newspapers for distribution within Black neighborhoods. These documents were never intended to be housed within museum collections. I wanted to present these objects closer to their original condition of living, as responses to the political assassinations of well-known Black radicals, in order to reveal the reappropriation of anti-Black violence in the strategy and rhetoric of revolutionary organizing. Chapter 1 addresses the performative strategies of original revolutionary and countercultural journalistic publications as they document continuity between Black Panther Bobby Hutton's 1968 murder and histories of lynching in relation to visions of Black futurity. In the book, I define Black futurity as visions of Black freedom that imagine Black life beyond the structural violences of white supremacy. Hutton was both the first member of the Black Panther Party for self-defense and the first murder within the party, which made his death particularly influential in the BPP's self-fashioning as a revolutionary organization dedicated to configuring the politically generative potential of Black radical death. Disseminated in flyers, newspaper articles, and other journalistic publications, Hutton's image was reproduced widely as a way to immediately call attention to both the political conditions and uses of his death. Various iterations of the same photographic image considered in this chapter appeared in the wake of his death, yet each served a distinct purpose. These multiple uptakes of the photographic image include on the covers of the Berkeley Barb and the Black Panther, a prominent feature on a flyer, and a political poster insert by Emory Douglas, Minister of Culture for the party. What all of these mobilizations share is an offset reproduction of Hutton's photographic image in an attempt to make sense of his murder. The photograph's origin is unclear and disputed, but it appears and reappears across contexts. To make sense of the photograph's active life, I deploy Huey Copeland and Krista Thompson's brilliant conceptualization of the Afrotrope as an analytic mode of engagement that, quote, highlights the mercurial flow of the Black image across the globe. As a medium organized around an evidentiary claim, Hutton's photograph works to call attention to a deep concern within the BPP to reckon with the conditions of his death, while also entering his revolutionary life in the historical archive as a future-oriented practice. In Chapter 2, I illustrate how the political objects left behind from Chicago Panther Fred Hampton's gruesome 1969 murder perform the limits of the Black body as captured by the documentary footage in the murder of Fred Hampton. The 1971 documentary acts as a central object of inquiry for this chapter, and one that opens up modes of presentation and mediation in order to engage politicized looking amongst its audience. Howard Alk and Mike Gray, two members of the progressive filmmaking collective The Film Group, initially intended to make a film about Fred Hampton's political leadership in the Chicago chapter. The original 1968 film project about Hampton became quite a different project after his murder in '69. To capture this intensity, the filmmakers deployed experimental techniques in filming, editing, and sequencing the documentary. I focus on the documentary because of how the film's formal strategies emphasize scenes from Hampton's life and death, and by doing so suggest a series of conceptual and temporal lapses. The film spends about equal time on footage of Hampton from rallies and meetings, and footage discussing the factual debates resulting from his murder. These scenes, combined with various conceptual and temporal strategies, encourage a complex mode of looking that showcases an anticipatory relationship to his death. The documentary's sequencing helps clarify Hampton's own salient anticipation of his murder, with a focus on the objects that form the ground of a particular Black radical political consciousness. In this way, the film makes space for a consideration of Hampton's afterlife through intense visual meditations on the matter of his murder, blood, propaganda, and books that open up a possibility of a politics that live on. I want to focus the rest of my time on the final chapter of the book, which focuses on George Jackson's 1971 murder in San Quentin prison and the subsequent political posters made in response to his death. Found guilty of a $70 gas station robbery, George Jackson was incarcerated in 1960. Then 18, he was given an indeterminate sentence of 1 year to life and shuttled between various prisons in California. During his time inside, Jackson engaged in a rigorous study of political economic theory and social movements that ignited his own politicization, which eventually led to his membership to the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Jackson was a known political organizer inside and was responsible for building multiracial coalitions that aimed to engage in revolutionary warfare against capitalism. This reputation, which led to long stretches of time in solitary confinement, is also often attributed as a leading factor in his eventual murder. Jackson was gunned down on August 21st, 1971 in San Quentin prison by prison guards for allegedly trying to escape. Following a successful 30-minute takeover of a solitary confinement unit, Jackson was killed by sniper guards as he ran toward the prison wall. Autopsy and crime scene investigations confirm that Jackson did have a gun on him at the time of his murder. What is yet to be determined, however, is exactly how Jackson acquired a gun in one of the nation's most highly militarized and securitized prisons. This information is especially important given the fact that the California Department of Corrections has competing and uneven information on the status of the gun's caliber and description. The CDC paperwork confirms that San Quentin guards killed Jackson, and yet there is no definitive visual evidence of how he was murdered. In a severely militarized environment, heavily invested in the role of sight, surveillance, and documentation, it is highly questionable that there is no available prison archive that recorded Jackson's murder in detail. While particular state-sanctioned ephemera, like a gun used to kill Jackson, which is housed in San Quentin Prison Museum, are preserved, archival chasing left me empty-handed when it came to photographs of the crime scene, first officer investigative reports, or even eyewitness accounts. It seems that all of that information just disappeared, if it even existed at all. In this chapter, I turn to two political posters as they deploy histories of anti-Black violence in order to imagine death as a means for Black liberation. These posters, along with Jackson's publications, Soledad Brother and Blood in My Eye, illustrate how state-sanctioned performances of anti-Black violence range from technologies of surveillance and policing, judicial structures, socioeconomic policies, incarceration, and extra-legal sanctioned vigilante practices like lynching. The only official state document I could access on Jackson was that same 4-page inventory of books I previously shared, left in Jackson's cell, which, as scholars and lovers of art, we know intimately tells us an enormous amount of information about Jackson's life. And I know it's hard to see because the scan isn't that great, but some books that really, when I first kind of received this document, the books that brought chills to me were books that transformed my life, right? Like Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks, a reader in Marxist philosophy, and June Jordan's book, Some Changes, which is kind of this incredible book of poetry. With regard to his death, however, the lack of substantive visual evidence suggests that conditions of visibility organize how Jackson's death specifically, and anti-Black violence more generally, are historically and materially structured. Given this institutional censorship, activists and artists turned to alternative canons to recompose the visual conditions of Jackson's murder, and therefore prioritize visibility in order to offer a vision of death that reconceptualized the radical Black body. I will now turn to a 1971 poster titled Power to the People, George, made by Rafael Morante, a member of the Ospal Artists Collective, an internationalist movement that created posters from the 60s through the 80s, whose initial goal after Jackson's death was to make visible the brutality of it. This poster showcases how Black radical images in the 70s drew upon a long history of visual citational practices that combined iterative formal qualities with shared historical citations within the canon of Black art history. Against a stark white backdrop, "Power to the People, George" is scribed in lucid cursive. Next to the script, stacked translations of the slogan appear in 3 different languages: Spanish, French, and Arabic. The name George only appears in the English translation, "Power to the People, George." Black ink outlines a stationary body laid horizontally from left to right across the page's landscape. On the leftmost side, the black ink silhouettes the figure of a head, mouth open, facing up, with arms and legs also bare and black in silhouetted form. Dressed in a jumpsuit sketched in gray cross-hatched patterns, sleeves rolled 3/4 of the way up. The pants billow out to bell bottoms, a fashion style made popular in the 60s and 70s. His feet are bare, toes pointed toward the edge of the paper's right-hand border. Blood, colored red, white, and blue, pours from 3 distinct openings in his torso. The blood spills into a puddle, the contents of which are arranged schematically as the American flag. Not only a painting, not only a drawing, not only a declarative political text, this print captures the significant possibilities within the political and artistic genre of the political poster. In this poster, the figured corpse presented before us is Jackson, indicated by the cursive caption. The caption labors because it relies on particular facts that spectators are assumed to know. 1, the phrase "power to the people" is notably associated with the Black Panther Party specifically and the Black Power movement more generally. And 2, George refers to George Jackson, whose murder in San Quentin sparked rage across global liberation movements at the time. These informational fragments serve to make meaning of the corpse figure inked horizontally on the poster itself. Along with this fragment of narrative text, Jackson's corpse is figured in silhouette, a form that gives us insight into a particular history of anti-Blackness. By figuring Jackson through the use of silhouette, Morante turns the frame onto how Black subjectivity is conditioned through programmatic violence. Jackson's figure becomes an open space of identification through anti-Black violence, and therefore enables a notion of subjectivity that historically engages with histories of lynching. In this dramatic staging, the body in the poster likens itself to a body in Elizabeth Catlett's 1946 lino cut and A Special Fear for My Loved Ones, which aligns itself with generations of Black people who remain uncounted victims of racist violence. Printmaker and sculptor Elizabeth Catlett's 1946 lino cut and A Special Fear for My Loved Ones rhymes formally and politically with Morante's figuration of Jackson's body. And A Special Fear for My Loved Ones is the penultimate print in the artist's 15-piece series, The Negro Woman. In contrast to Morante's poster, and A Special Fear for My Loved Ones is oriented in portrait versus landscape and figures a young Black man lying on his back, right hand raised and eyes gazing above him. In Catlett's print, the perspective reshapes the viewer's relationship to figure and ground. His entire body cuts the plane of the image diagonally, creating a distortion where the figure's right foot and left knee graze the edge of the picture's frame. Contrasting lines highlight shadow and texture and compose the figure's clothing, nonspecific trousers, shirt, and jacket. A noose grips his neck, the loose end of the rope dangling by his side. To his left, we see 3 pairs of boots and trousers. It is unclear if the figure's feet and ankles are floating above as if also lynched, or if they are surrounding the main figure in an ominous act of danger and violence. The entire print features a fury of striking marks, some sharp, jagged lines, and other thicker, fluid shapes that appear to hold, cradle, or furiously sway the subject. There is both movement and stillness in the work, as the stark contrasts of black and white leave no area of the print undefined. Historian Melanie Herzig has noted how both past and present fears are invoked here, thus speaking to the continuity of anti-Black violence and the lasting impact of the image presented. This understanding of Catlett's print is similar to Jacqueline Goldsby's reading of anti-lynching political cartoons, where Black artists could, quote, use the drawing techniques of line, proportion, and point of view to determine what and how the viewer experienced the scene staged in the cartoon's visual field, end quote. There is a similar uptake in Catlett's print, where the viewer is encouraged to pay attention to the intensity of the figure's contortion, the rapid cross-hatching that resembles movement, and the overwhelming uncertainty that comes with watching a murder attempt. Thus, the act is, and this is Goldsby again, no longer a timeless atrocity that bore no relation to then present-day cultural politics. Lynching is figured as a symptom of modern American living. In this sense, Catlett brings us into a present-tense relationship to the image, while also activating histories that make that present tense possible. I turn to both these images together precisely because of how they imagine anti-Black violence as a graphic mode of bodily contortion that has devastating impacts on the ways that violence and death are figured within a Black radical tradition. For one, in Catlett's image, the figure's status as dead or alive is left unanswered. The dependent identifiable clues that might help a viewer decipher open eyes, loose rope, are unresolved. Are his eyes open because he's alive, or is this a scene of a corpse whose eyes remained open after the fact? Was he freed and saved from imminent death by lynching, or was he cut loose post-mortem? These details complicate the image's emphasis on death, while also leaving unassailable the fierce terror of the violence that inform it. Catlett's decision to present the figure contorted, seemingly on the ground, highlights the notion of physical impact and raises the possibility of bodily contusions and commuted fractures. The graphic detail, the level of texture, perspective, and the body's angular stature connect to Morante's use of cross-hatching, contortion, and lack of gravity to depict Jackson. Morante's image deploys the contorted body to gesture to the broader history of anti-Black violence as intensely manifested through acts of lynching. Jackson's body's strange position, legs and feet hip-width apart, right arm bent, left arm straight, and sitting in the pool of the American flag-colored blood, is made even more uncanny in relation to Jackson's head. Thrown back, mouth slack-jawed, Jackson's head bends at a severe 90-degree angle facing left. Both Jackson's neck and Catlett's subject's neck are crooked, forcing the head toward an awkward angle. The neck snap is indicated in the angular, a snap that is most clearly linked to the lynching act. And while Jackson's neck is not secured by a noose like that of Catlett's subject, the bodily contortion presupposes a genealogical link. The angles and bends of limbs, the body's horizontality coupled with its obvious position, not in rest, but in struggle, places Jackson's death in relationship to those known and unknown in a broader history of anti-Black violence. In addition to picturing anti-Black violence, Power to the People George also imagines conditions of Black freedom. As a final close look at the poster, I want to focus on the disproportionate scale of Jackson's silhouetted feet, which take up a significant amount of the right half of the image. Because Jackson's bare feet are rendered at such a scale, they locate for us a Black artistic visual language that simultaneously mobilizes abstraction and figuration to create a composition of the radical Black body that contains within it the relationship between the violence of captivity and a quest for freedom. Because of the use of silhouette here, Jackson's body is saturated in black, the depths of which add to the severity of his feet's particular disproportion. The feet figured in this image direct our vision to the borders of the page, as if the toes on Jackson's left foot graze the edges of the paper. Dangling over the paper's white plane, Jackson's feet seem ungrounded, untethered, as if hanging from the weight of his body. In fact, if we imagine the poster reoriented 90 degrees, we can see a vertical gravitational pull toward the edge of the page, which ultimately recollects images of lynching victims who often share in the positioning of the head, neck, and are too barefooted. Both the appearance of a floating body and the dimensions of his feet also draw our attention toward the use of silhouette as an account of Jackson in the particular context of his death, while also abstracting specificity in a way that leaves the figure open enough to be that of any revolutionary. The emphasis on bare feet here also proportionately rivals more direct emphasis on the violent act, thus making the feet the site for imagining both violence and freedom. By exaggerating Jackson's limbs, that part of the body responsible for movement, transport, escape, the poster makes visible how Jackson's murder exists within not only a long history of violence, but also it insists that we should not consider this event as immobilizing. Instead, his bare feet also invoke the runaway slave, a figure of Black resistance, like Jackson himself. Limbs appear as a familiar trope within slave narratives, often to illustrate how runaway captives imagine their battered and torn feet as signs of their resilience and commitment to liberation. This narrative attention to feet is echoed across Black art history, which allows us to reconsider the compositional power of the image in mobilizing radical looking practices that see feet for their fugitive qualities. Often composed to signal various scales and visions of Black freedom, I turn to how feet demarcate the fugitive possibilities of escape within regimes of anti-Black terror within a suite of works by Jacob Lawrence. Lawrence's 1940 series on Harriet Tubman, the abolitionist celebrated for her lawlessness, and the Underground Railroad, which facilitated the fugitive practice of escape under the cover of night, best captures a more figurative emphasis on bare feet. In this biographical series, Lawrence sequenced key moments in Tubman's life across 31 captioned panels, acting as a kind of picture book. Lawrence's paintings employ modernist attachments, including the flatness of each figure and scene, as well as the use of unconventional geometries and settings. In his depiction of his subjects, Lawrence moves us through the partial or whole figure whose specificity is often obscured or even silhouetted. In the same spirit of Jackson's poster, which utilizes silhouette to materialize the relationship between the specific and the abstract, Lawrence's paintings make themselves available to a populist impulse in which there's always room for the Black viewer to see themselves in the figure. As we can gather from the images presented, Lawrence also emphasized feet in several of the panels. Shackles which bind the feet to a particular place of confinement mark the condition of captivity in some, while others highlight the escape from restriction into open yet ominous pastures, leading to nowhere in particular. However, Lawrence is careful not to give us the false promise of the purely pastoral. Instead, these open fields are saturated in dark blues and blacks, magnifying the unknown and treacherous futures that escape brings. Lawrence's paintings give us a landscape fraught with the terrors of violence and uncertainties of freedom. In a late addition to the series, added in 1967, entitled Daybreak, A Time to Rest, Tubman is lying on her back and gazing at the sky while embracing a rifle. Her feet, which take over the substrate and our vision, are disproportionately scaled, even deformed, in relation to the rest of her body. Large and grotesque, calloused and worn, Tubman's feet are the painting's subject. Lawrence deforms the plane, the scale of the body, and our vision through his figuration of Tubman's Deformation is a strategy crucial to Black artistic practice, and here the strategy operates to enliven the fugitive qualities of escape practiced by Tubman herself. Her feet tell us something the rest of her body does not. The underside of her bare feet, where her skin meets the ground, mobilizes the intensity of her lawlessness, of her status as an accomplice, if not conduit, for enslaved fugitives committing illegal acts of escape. Our vision is consumed by her fugitivity, running from the very law that mandates her captivity. This visualization of Black liberation is tinged with the very capture that mandates escape in the first place. Her feet, then, are the vessels that make escape the means for Black liberation. Knowing that Jackson's attempted prison escape warranted his murder, his feet come to signal the dangers of enacting one's own freedom. After all, his feet led him to his death. Mirroring tales of runaway enslaved persons who attempted to enact their freedom and thus risked imminent death through escape, the feet in Power to the People, George, galvanized resistance. To take one's freedom through escape, through the use of one's feet, is to activate a vision of Black freedom that understands death as a very likely possibility, but risks life to pursue a radical collective future. Jackson himself articulated this sentiment in a letter written on May 26, 1970. Using the fragmented body as a metaphor for collectivity within revolutionary struggles, Jackson writes, "There are no principal parts. You conceded that with the all or none. It means that the small toe is as important to the human organism as the heart. It must be that way. The small toe is essential to balance, and its loss could precede, or let's say presage, the loss of the foot. Without footing, the movements of the head and the heart become less efficient. The remainder of the organism could survive without the arm, but it should never be surrendered without making the strongest possible protest. I won't stand for any loss at all. The instant that my toe is taken, I will lose my head." Jackson's poetics offer up a composition of the body that considers the relation between all parts. Elsewhere, Jackson refers to the head and heart as the twofold structure for revolutionary struggles, which requires an activation of the rational and irrational, cerebral and physical, the practical and the soulful. In this passage, the head and heart are restaged in their relationship to the body, only to be abstracted more generally to speak of the Black freedom struggle. To be warned of the loss of one's foot or to be without footing is to slow down the momentum of that struggle. To move toward a vision of freedom is to depend on one's little toe as much as one's head and heart. These words and images offer a profound intervention in theories of the Black body. Both Morante's poster and Jackson's reflections offer a theory of the Black revolutionary body, dead and alive, as a means towards a revolutionary praxis, as outlaws or fugitives working towards the end of this world so that we can begin the construction of a new one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think we have time for a few questions that I'll moderate for you, Sam. Questions, comments? Yes. Quint.
It's not reality what you're saying. I'm really thinking of that picture of him with two of his books, which I'm going to take
Mm-hmm.
And I'm struck, did you talk about the blood in the American flag, which I know looks like it's reversed. But yeah, I wonder if you might comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. The American flag, I spend a lot of time in the book talking about other artistic, specifically Black artistic responses to the flag, because there's also a conversation that Morante is having here with Faith Ringgold and David Hammonds and Betye Saar, and that's, that is like absolutely very much present in this poster. Here, I mean, it's interesting, it's inverted, absolutely, like you're kind of saying, it's kind of like a mirror reflection. What I find particularly interesting about that is the material process of print, like when he made the print, right, it wasn't inverted, and then when you print it, it becomes this kind of like, the image that you get is its inversion. And so, I imagine that for him, it was a happy mistake, like one of those beautiful things that can only happen in the material practice if you're an artist. And so that's kind of my fantasy and my fantasy conversation with Rafael Morante. But one of the things that I also find particularly interesting about the use of American flag here is it is the only evidence of gravity in the print, right? That it is the only instance that is the weight that brings this thing down, and it's a symbolic weight. And it is also the literal ground upon which his kind of body lays. And so there's another kind of quality here that I think Morante and Ostbal in general are bringing into the conversation, which is like a deep criticism of American empire and nationalism. And so, usually the slain body is covered in the flag, right? And here it is kind of like undergirded, it is the structure upon which this murder takes place. So there are many, many layers to the use of the flag here. In the chapter, I kind of try to talk a little bit about some of those, but specifically in relation to a Black artistic practice and a critique of the flag. But that's absolutely here. Thank you for that question. Yeah, please.
Can you talk a little bit about the successes and the challenges that you face in doing research?
Oh, I love that question. Successes and challenges I face doing the research. One kind of incredible challenge of the research is actually one that I'm sure we all feel the weight of, is this generation is passing and quickly, and the urgency of the project was not only because of the content and the history for me, but also because of the artists and their work and wanting to kind of, have the opportunity or occasion to let that work live in another way. And so it was very hard to kind of catch people. Mike Gray, who's one of the filmmakers in the second chapter of the book, when I talk about Murder of Fred Hampton, he passed away in the course of me making the book, right? And it was always a reminder, right, of kind of working very quickly and actually putting pressure on our academic structures, right, which often take long processes of peer review and editing and revision, and constantly kind of putting pressure as much as I can on those structures to make this happen fast, which isn't to say not carefully, not with a lot of focus and intention, but kind of lighting a fire. This is not something that we can wait for, not because of me, but because of the artists and their work. So that was a challenge. A kind of interesting thing that came out of the research for me was, which I would qualify as a success, is I an incredible community of artists formed around the project in various ways. So I am not an artist, right? I am a historian. I have zero creative skills, zero. And so I don't, you don't know what you don't know, right? So in the course of researching, for example, on political posters, I went and talked to printmakers, I worked with people who do this as a job and do this as a life's passion. And one of the things that came up actually with this another poster that I talk about in the book, in this chapter, is I was curious about, it's a very complex poster in terms of like its relationship to image and text, but also its relationship to color. And so I approached a colleague of mine and I was like, can you just like walk me through what you see? Because this is what I see. And she was like, why don't you come into the studio and we'll pull a print that's like this? And you can kind of like get the material process together, right? And that is something that is just like the invitation that the artists continue to give in the research process that then allowed for these kinds of contemporary, in the moment, real-time connections that helped me learn as a historian about like the materiality of the process. And it allowed me to see things that I wouldn't have ever seen if I just kind of tacked this on as like an example of my theory or something silly like that, right? Like the object generated so much more, and it enlivened and enriched my sense of the history so much more because I was able to get in it because of the artists around me, and I'm so grateful for that. Thank you. Hi. Yeah.
And I think there was an exhibit called like Black Panther Revolutionary Art.
Oh yeah. Curated by Essence Hardin, who's yeah. No. You're not.
I just stumbled onto it and I had no idea, and I think everybody else is still alive.
Yeah.
Was he? Okay. Were you able to see that exhibit, or did they ever do it again?
Yeah. Yeah, so he's, Emery is an incredible figure because he has like lived and worked in the Bay from the 60s on. In early iterations of this project, we kind of, were in conversation, and then we kind of got reacquainted more recently, just kind of talking about the trajectory of where the project ended up. But we did a little conversation together, and what became very clear to me is like, Emery was always prioritized art being a form of education. And so for him, and his work with the party in the 60s all the way through to today, he still makes work, out of his studio today. Minister of Culture, yeah, for the Black Panther Party. Yeah, exactly, the Minister of Culture. He would, show work in a way that was just that prioritized pedagogy, that prioritized teaching and learning. And so whether it was in the newspaper, his posters were often in the newspaper. He designed the Black Panther newspaper cover to cover. He was the artistic director. He worked with the younger emerging artists. And so whether it was that, which had, high distribution nationwide, internationally, or if he showed at Suzanne Jackson's gallery in Los Angeles in the early 70s. And if you're interested in that history, the brilliant Kelly Jones's book, South of Pico, talks about this in detail. But he exhibited at that gallery, not because he was interested in being kind of read as an artist or interested in the art world or interested in the conversation that was like happening amongst artists specifically, but he believed that the gallery was another space for education, another space for teaching and learning. So he wanted that work to be in that frame, and it was always in conversation with community for him. And I think that is reflected in like this kind of newer resurgence that he's having in art spaces specifically, right? So he was in the Soul of a Nation show curated by Zoe Whitley and Mark Godfrey. Essence Hardin curated his work into a show. And I think even now to this day, he's like, I don't really care about the art world, but I care that my work is relevant to people that make work. And is relevant to artists or to activists and organizers. And so if that's a space I can have increased circulation, for sure, yeah.
So I hope that you'll join us outside for a reception where you can ask Sampada more questions. But I just want to thank you all for coming. Yes?
I just want to show something I found in the archives.
Oh, yeah. This is a plug for the archives, so I'm going to make room for this.
Sorry. I just wanted to show that, I've been doing research all week, and I came across this incredible Benny Andrews catalog in the Trutobia Benjamin papers. And Benny Andrews was an organizer of and editor of the Attica book, which I talk about in the book. And it's referenced in the book, but it's also referenced in the cover design of Death's Futurity. So I wanted to kind of show this piece. It was an inspiration for a work he did in 1972 called Trash, which is his first, he calls it his kind of one of his first reflections of blackness, not just whiteness. And it was really inspired by the Attica State Prison uprising, which resulted in the weeks after George Jackson's 1971 murder. So I just archives are important. They help us do what we do, and they live on. So I just wanted to do that before we go. Enjoy.
No, thank you. And this is a perfect transition to remind you to come back to the center in 2 weeks, where we will be featuring the archives and the recent acquisition of the papers of the artist Alonzo Davis. We've been working this semester with a class in the iSchool, the College of Information Studies, going through the papers. They will talk through their research process with those papers, as well as show us a virtual exhibition that they have created. And Alonzo will be here as well. So please come back on the 30th at 6 p.m. for that. But let's give one more round of applause to Dr. Aranke.